Welcome one and all to the final video in the Duneuary series. I'm not holding up the book today because we're not talking about a book today. We are talking about Dune by David Lynch, which is a film from the 80s. I'm not holding the film up because I just watched it on Amazon Prime Video. I had to buy it on there because I didn't have time to go to a shop and buy a Blu-ray of it. I wasn't sure if I'd want to own it on Blu-ray. The history of this film is the stuff of legend, basically. The story goes that David Lynch was brought on to make Dune after the previous guy that they were going to get to make it dropped out, and I think they approached Ridley Scott to do it, and he dropped out so he could do Blade Runner. So it was sort of in a state of flux, and then David Lynch came along, and he's like, I can definitely do that. And I hate to break it to you all, but he definitely couldn't do it. It is a mess of a film. I don't know how much of that is Lynch's fault. I can imagine quite a lot of it, to be fair. The story is that he wanted a 3-hour cut of the film, and the studio was like, no, Lynch, you need to have only a 2-hour cut of the film. And he was like, fuck you. But he did it anyway. So what he did insist, and this isn't on the Amazon version that I watched because it's like the theatrical cut. So he had his name scrubbed from the film, and he had the writer credited as Judas Booth. I'm not even making that up. Go look it up on Wikipedia or whatever. But the screenwriter of Dune has had his name credited as Judas Booth because Lynch thought he had betrayed him, basically. So let's talk about the film first of all as an adaptation of Dune. Having now read Dune and seen the film twice, I think that it was an almost impossible task, because Dune as a book, so much of it is told in the inner monologues of the characters. Not a huge amount of things happen in the book. It's just a few people have conversations, then there's some wandering through the desert, there's a sandworm bit, and then there's a fight. That's the basic structure of Dune, right? The story. Unfortunately, all of the intricacies, what makes up the other fucking 500 pages of the book, are all in how characters feel and how they interpret people's emotions and feelings and thoughts and actions, because that's half of what Paul's power is. He can instantly read people. It's the Bene Gesserit thing, is how you interpret people's emotions, and you get a reading on them and stuff like that. Lynch was not able to portray that in the film, so you just get reams and reams and reams of exposition that really hurt the pacing of the film. It's so rushed through the actual events because it just loses all of the quiet subtleties of the story, which just make it, for someone who hasn't read the book, a complete fucking mess. I watched it with two people the second time round. The first time I watched it on my own. The second time I watched it with a person who has read the book and someone who hasn't. And the guy who read the book said to me, I only know everything that's happening here because I remember it from the book and I know what's going on. And my friend who hadn't read the book finished the film and said that was just an incomprehensible mess. He didn't understand. He understood the basics of why things were happening because the exposition is so ham-fisted that it just tells you. There is literally a scene at the start where all of these fucking, the guild guys show up with a giant brain in a glass box, and they have a chat with the Emperor, and they just literally spell out the plot for you so that you know what's happening. I might be wrong about this, but I've heard maybe it's an urban legend or maybe it's true, but when people went into the cinema to see the film, upon its release, there were pamphlets there explaining what Dune was about because the film was such a mess. And I can see that being necessary, because there's just the scene where the hunter seeker comes into Paul's room to kill him. It just cuts to it out of nowhere, and it's Carl McLachlan in his room, and then a needle, big syringe floats through his wall, and you're like, what the fuck is this? Why is it happening? The first time I watched it, even I was a bit not 100% sure what's happening here. It's a mess. Structure-wise, it is a mess of a film. It's a mess of an adaptation. Just because it's mad. There's so much missing. Lynch is probably right that it needed another hour to have all the subtle intricacies in there. But the problem is, if you need a third hour to explain things that are going on in your first 2 hours, it's just not done well enough, I don't know if that's Lynch's fault, because how else can you... There's only so much you can portray on film, and so much of what makes the book rich will be lost in that. But there's a load of things that they left out, which really shot them in the foot, I think, as the film went on, because they left out all of the stuff about what the Bene Gesserit are, what the Space Guild is focused on too much, and for some reason navigators are big weird brain things. There's a lot of Lynchisms in here. It looks pretty shit. The special effects are really bad for a lot of the time, but the practical effects are pretty good. Lynch as a director is more adept at doing things small scale. I don't think it worked well when he did this big epic. Because, things like Twin Peaks, where he's working with a small scenario, films like Blue Velvet that he's done, he's working with this small town, small group of characters, not hugely complex spaceships and all this stuff, and it didn't work with his directorial style, I don't think. It looked ugly. A lot of the design decisions that were clearly very Lynch just were bizarre. There's a thing in the books. There's when Bene Gesserit used the voice, which is, as I read it, supposed to be almost like a Scientology thing. L. Ron Hubbard has this idea of you use a certain tone of voice and force of command which will make people obey you. That is a thing in this book, and it's a thing in Scientology. If any Scientologists ever were allowed to read Dune, they would probably recognise the Bene Gesserit as super Scientologists, or what the goal of Scientology is. But that's besides the point. The point is, in the Lynch film, this was instead changed to a weird audio distortion overlay, which made people go mad and obey you. It functioned the same, but it was presented in this really weird, almost superpower, when really it was just a result of learning and intuition, enhanced by super spice, of course. And that was weird. There's a lot of weird overacting. They had Alia, the little girl who becomes a Reverend Mother. For some reason, they had all of the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers were super bald with these weird nun robes on. And apparently it's like mandatory uniform because even the 3-year-old from the desert, when upon becoming a Reverend Mother, was just head shaven and dressed like that as well. And there's just super amounts of overacting in there. Sting is in the film in a bizarre choice. He pulls the weirdest facial expressions and has the most bizarre scene where he steps out of a steam room just in his pants and he's like stretching out. It's like, I don't remember that being in the book, and I'm not sure why it was. And they changed the Baron to being not just fat, but also to have like doctors that cultivate diseases on his face. And he floats around in a big balloon suit instead of being, because I guess he wasn't fat enough, so they had to make him more gross by making him float about in a balloon suit. It was weird. It was weird. It's really the only way to describe the film is that it's just bizarre. Is it entertaining? Yeah, kind of. Like the sandworm stuff is pretty fun. The Baron being an oddball is pretty fun. But really it's just confusing more than anything else. I definitely wouldn't recommend watching it if you haven't read the book. And even if you have read the book, it's probably worth not watching it. Unless you are one of those people that like a laugh. Because it is kind of long. It's 2 hours, just over 2 hours. I think it's like 2 hours, 10 minutes or whatever. And that's not like egregiously long in today's world. With films being like almost 2.5 to 3 hours each now. But it doesn't have enough in there. There's no substance to it. It's all like the events of the book happen in the film, but all of its meaning is lost. It's not a good adaptation, and it's not really a good film. So that's my thoughts on Dune, really, by David Lynch. It was disappointing after so long of it being hyped up as this super like hilarious failure. It was more just sort of head scratching than anything. It did have some funny over the top moments, but you can probably watch a best of clips on YouTube and get the same idea really, without having to sit there for 2 hours. So that's it. Duneuary's over, guys. I now only have 3 days left as of the time of filming this, and this is the last day upon which you'll be seeing this video, to now read The Witcher, The Last Wish, which should be doable, hopefully. Depends how busy I am. But yes, that's it. Duneuary accomplished, mission complete, and that is James from Plots and Points signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and do all that other stuff, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you next time for more talk about books and shit. Bye.